Hello, here are some thoughts on related issues of effort, will, heroism. You will have noted that I have retained all of the endurance-sucking, debilitating effort, pain of effort features of first-generation Champions. Champions now has your character sucking wind. I've even made it worse. Not only have I retained the 1 point of endurance per 5 points of character points in punching and energy blasts and things, I have also taken away most of the ways to drop endurance costs. So limited uses are no longer there, and endurance batteries are no longer there. There is a no endurance advantage, but it is very, very, very pricey. Okay, with all that said, what's going on? Aren't characters going to be on their knees if they try to even have the most basic fight? And furthermore, what's up with this anyway? I mean, how old school can we get with yet another thing to track down in tiny little points? I mean, don't we have enough to worry about with velocity and stuff like that? Here I am stunned and body, like real damage, and then I have to go and track this fatigue thing too. The answer is yes. I have brought this very front and center into play. In fact, to the extent where your character's energy expenditure may even be more important than their stun as a total quantity. What's going on? Let's take a look at some of the details of these rules. First of all, endurance is more than just a robotic tracker of strength and energy blasts. Endurance also applies to using anything when you force it past its page limits. Keep that in mind. That is something that the player decides. My character will try harder. It says this much strength, I've got more strength than that. There's even an ego rule to push it past the 10-point limit, which is actually in the original rules. And therefore, yes, you can really rack your character into immense effort when ego is involved. This is one of the few, perhaps the only instance when making an ego roll represents the character's will in action. You see, because there really isn't a will roll in Champions. There isn't really a will characteristic. And there is no, for example, pool of willpower points that you can kind of just reach over and like stuff onto rolls for bonuses. How does willpower, how does that sense of heroic effort actually come into play? Part one is what I already talked about. It can't come into play unless your character is desperate and still capable of action. So stun isn't going to do it. Stun doesn't debilitate your character's actions, and other mechanics related to it, like being stunned, actually take them out of action. So therefore, we need some other thing that goes down and has some consequences when it's at 0, but doesn't put your character down. So endurance is it right there, and we need your character to be sucking wind on an endurance all the time. A couple of secondary effects of that are worthwhile. One, speed has a cost. You just buy up your character's speed, and if you aren't paying attention to this character in terms of energy, the character will zip around for 2 or 3 phases, then hit the deck. So therefore, we've got a little bit of a block on this sort of insta-speed silliness without buying it up in other ways. That's good. Also, during a complicated confrontation, different characters, villains as well, will be strategizing their recovery phases. All of a sudden, you don't just not care about endurance and just, take your post-12 recovery and wonder why we bothered in the first place. No, here you're saying, all right, I've got a speed of 5. It is segment 8. I think I'm going to take the recovery here. This is a good time. Most of my partners are operating on 8. They can cover me. I'm taking the recovery. They know I'm taking the recovery. They can set me up for what I'm going to do big, perhaps pushing something on segment 10. So all of this kind of using skills perhaps to get under cover and all kinds of things like that start to be important, making fights far more interesting and multiple round oriented than just a huge clash that's over before 12 segments are up with everybody just hurling damage and soaking it up in every direction. With that said, we can also look at the defenses. You'll see that my recommended defenses in Champions now are lower than the recommended defenses in the original. This is based on experience in play, that the very same effects that I'm talking about are brought forward if the characters are just a little more susceptible to taking stun damage than just soaking up 75, 80, 90% of whatever hits them. So not enough to just turn them all into, splat heroes, but enough so that when they take a hit, they do go tumbling, they do go, and the stun drops. And you said, okay, got hit, that happened. Therefore, there we are, with our characters conscious of how hard they've been hit, with the characters thinking, I can't take another one like that, with all sorts of things tying into what they're going to choose to do next. Now we're talking about the conditions under which choosing to push, and perhaps using your ego to push more, become important and, for lack of a better word, dramatic. Let's add in a couple of other features of will. Breaking free of things. This is handled physically by a strength roll or mentally by an ego roll. Yes, you can break free of mind control using your ego as strength. So with those in question, you suddenly see that both are amenable to pushing. Willpower, again, it's not just strength as muscle, it is the character trying hard. A couple of other examples that tie in, and perhaps one of the most important to slot in as a whole gear in this framework: presence. Presence attacks, particularly those that are less about cowing a crowd of people into dropping everything they've got and fleeing pell-mell, but much more in the sense of impact that makes people hesitate. You only need 1 times presence to get a discernible effect on the character's options, the target's options in the next round, or rather, phase. Interestingly enough, everybody who can perceive the presence attack is affected by it. You have designated target or targets, but everyone is affected to 1 step down. So therefore, if you really hammer one character with a hardcore presence attack, all the others get 1 step down instead. That's not so bad if you're talking about making people lose a full phase or hesitate for their next action or things like that, especially in a big group combat. Don't forget, too, that presence attacks are not just about boo, they are about content in many cases. And the bonuses for content, it talks about appropriate monologues. What does that even mean? It means that the content matters. It means that we're talking about the psychological limitations of the targets. It means we're talking about what you're saying to them in terms of any fictional content at all. So, there your character is. Struggling, pushing, dealing with energy expenditure, already bringing in things like endurance and ego. And now we talk about a presence attack. Because presence attacks are free. Not even 0 phase, free actions. Which means you just do them. It doesn't have to be your phase. It doesn't have to be your action. Some villain hammers you with mind control and hits, and you are mind controlled. Mind control is not a robot effect. Unless that character says, don't say anything, your character can talk. There you are, mind controlled. Nail back with a presence attack as hard as you can. saying the most appropriate, most important, most relevant thing to that character as you can, and all of a sudden you have the classic struggling against mind control. Then you use your ego to try to break free. Wow, that character is hesitating, if you can. Even if you can't do this, that hesitation can open things up for your allies. Now we're talking about role-playing. We're talking about what the characters do, to whom, how the rules work, the framework for the most satisfying moments possible. And if it doesn't work out for your character, we see how heroic they were in their defeat. Endurance, effort, pushing, ego, presence, all work together, and you have all the willpower emerging and all of the relevant play possible that you could ever desire.